afternoon and welcome to Bophelong, a place of hope. I am Bulemo Lebatsi. This is the show that features individuals with inspirational stories and brings them to the fore with the intention to inspire you, our viewers at home. In South Africa, there are 6 rapes reported to police every hour. Meanwhile, the South African Medical Research Council has warned that rape statistics are inaccurate and may be deceptive as many sexual assaults go unreported. It is for this reason that Charlene's story is of the utmost importance. Charlene Lau breaks the silence. Take a look at her story.
We read about it all too often. A rape occurs every 16 seconds in South Africa, while countless cases go unreported. According to a study done by the Medical Research Council, a quarter of men interviewed admitted to raping someone. Without exact numbers, it's safe to say there are many traumatized women walking our streets. Charlene Lau has been raped not once, not twice, but several times in her life, and it all began at the tender age of 5 years old.
On the outside, we were quite an ordinary family. My parents went to work, we went to school, and we spent a lot of time socializing with our cousins and friends. But on the inside of that house, there was a lot of fear and terror. I wanted my father to love me, and I wanted him to be happy with me, to be proud of me, and I wanted to be his little girl. And this was something that he told me we shared, and it was just between the two of us. Well, my father was an abusive alcoholic, so his terror it wasn't limited to me. My mother and my sister, we all endured his violent outbursts and his aggressive tendencies and beatings and the way that he was,
Just like many who experience sexual abuse in their homes, it's the speaking out that was the most frightening thought.
To me at the time, I felt very confused about it. What I do remember is feeling confusion and the thought of telling anybody making me feel very scared. And in many ways, that's where my feeling of aloneness began. And this feeling of aloneness is something that I've carried throughout my life.
Charlene grew into a teenager, but the trauma was not over.
Well, when I was 14 years old, my mother was away on business and my sister and I were at home for the weekend, and a group of boys from Mitchell's Plain came into the house and stayed overnight, and they drugged me and they proceeded to rape me. I passed out on occasion, but every time I came to, there was somebody else on top of me, and they were all crowded around, shouting, screaming, laughing, drinking.
Rape trauma syndrome is the medical term given to the response that survivors have to rape, and it entails shame and a low self-esteem.
I just abandoned myself, and I created 2 parts. I created the person who's outgoing and outspoken and very confident, the overachiever, and I created my pain self, that part of me that just held all of that fear and all of that anger. I think at the time I felt that the only common denominator was me. That this had happened with my father and it had happened with these boys, and the only thing both situations had in common was me. And so I felt like there was something wrong with me, that it was my fault, that the only reason these things are happening is because of who I am. Later on, about a year after the gang rape had happened, I developed an eating disorder. I eventually started cutting myself. I struggled incredibly with depression. I went through such deep lows, and it was all because I'd buried it. I'd buried it inside.
Growing into her adulthood, Charlene thought the trauma was behind her when she moved to Tanzania as a 26-year-old. She was wrong.
He was a friend, and he locked me in his house and he raped me. And I tried my best to fight him off and to get away from him, and I couldn't. And that was having come as far as what I had, having been through all of that trauma and worked so hard on healing and putting my life back together. Having that happen again, that really broke me.
How would Charlene find her healing? What of laying charges and pursuing justice? Would she be able to trust and be intimate with a man?
Charlene becomes not just a survivor, but also a microphone for others to speak out. This and more after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back to Bophelong, Place of Hope. Charlene has experienced unimaginable trauma through countless incidents of rape. Before the ad break, we saw her break the silence and talk about her experiences. Now let's see how she moves on, one step at a time. Take a look.
Rape is one of the most underreported crimes in South Africa. According to research, 1 in 4 South African women have been raped in their lifetimes, yet only 1 in 13 survivors of rape report the incident. Charlene made the choice not to be another unreported statistic.
So I'd laid the charge in December, and at the end of February they let me know that they were not going to pursue the case, and at the end of May I got the phone call to say that my father had a fatal stroke. And to tell you the truth, I was heartbroken. I'd lost my father. I feel like by going to the police station and laying that charge against my dad, that I wasn't just taking a stand for myself, but I was taking a stand for every other girl to be born into my family. That I was saying that enough is enough. This is where it ends. It stops with me. And the big question was, why now? Why after 25 years? Why now would you go and do something so painful? Why is this important now? But to me, there isn't a time limit on something like this. You know, somewhere along the line, somebody has to take a stand, and that will have a ripple effect.
Charlene learned that speaking out about what happened to her also gave permission to others to do the same.
I became haunted by their stories. I used to go to bed at night and just lie awake in bed thinking, oh Lord, I can't do nothing about this. I can't. How do I not do anything? How do I stay silent? And then having this fight with myself and saying to myself, yes, but you have a life to live, and really feeling that conviction coming up that eventually it became impossible for me to be quiet and to not do anything.
This then sparked the beginning of a movement.
One morning I was sitting on my stoep drinking my cup of tea, and I thought to myself, I'm going to walk to Cape Town. That's what I will do. I'll walk from Joburg to Cape Town. And that's how the Joy campaign was birthed. Rape is a very difficult issue to talk about. A lot of people feel that it's a kind of darkness that they don't want to associate themselves with. And so when you begin speaking to them, they immediately try to distance themselves from that topic. And so I felt that my angle on this walk needed to be different. I wanted to have a positive outlook. I wanted it to have a positive message. So I called it the Joy campaign. Yes, a rape survivor walking for joy.
Charlene became not only a survivor, but also an inspiration to other women.
You know, when you walk into a space and then the person just becomes a friend, and like, that's my buddy.
She doesn't try too hard to inspire you. She doesn't try to sound better. She just says things that make sense, and you can tell that it's coming from a very special place.
She had this immense amount of courage, and she kept telling me about how much she was learning about herself along the walk. And it was just such courage that she was willing to not just face the problem in our country, but to face issues in her own life and to be able to face them through the walk. And she's just such a warm, loving and caring person.
I think kilometers and walking and everything and overcoming your own fears, it's spirit building. I think you come out as a stronger person. I've seen her as a stronger person.
Rape can devastate individuals as well as challenge relationships, but Charlene was able to find love.
Oh, she's a fantastic wife. She's a fantastic woman. Very, very, very strong-willed. A man should support his wife, his girlfriend, his fiancée. He should just support women in general to be better at what they choose to be.
With stories like that of Anine Boyson, raped and killed in 2013, there still remains a lot of work to be done in ending the scourge of sexual violence in South Africa. But Charlene, with the Joy campaign, has every intention of being part of that solution.
The message of my walk is that there is always hope. We can't wait for somebody to step in to rescue us. We have to be the heroes of our own stories. That is the only way that meaningful change is possible, not only for ourselves, but for our children and our children's children.
What a very courageous woman indeed. But after the break, Toranan Legal Advocacy Center for Violence Against Women and Children joins us in studio. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're still watching Bophelong, a place of hope, and I'm your host, Bophelong Molebati. We are now looking at ways to inspire our women and children so that they're able to fight against violence, sexual violence, that is. And I'm now joined in studio by Lisa Witten. She's from WISA. Lisa, what does WISA stand for?
It's the Wits Institute for Social and Economic Research.
Oh, okay, that's where you're from. Because earlier on I said it's the Tshwaranang, but you said now you've moved on to WISA.
That's right, yes.
Okay, so we're still discussing ways to inspire our women and children so that they're able to stand up for themselves and fight against sexual violence. And we saw in the insert earlier on that there's still many unreported cases of rape. Lisa, why do we have to still have our women and children not protected in society? What does this say about our justice system?
It says a lot of things. I think part of the reason why so much rape stays unreported is the fear that reporting will serve no purpose, that it will just be a waste of time. And unfortunately, if we look at the statistics, that's not necessarily a wrong belief. The conviction rate in Gauteng, for example, is about 4%. I think the other reason that prevents victims from reporting is that often they're being threatened by the abuser. So they may be fearful that if they make this public, they're bringing more danger on themselves. And then I think there's also the fact that, unfortunately, many still don't get believed, especially if they're children. You know, they may be accused of, asked, how can you make up such a terrible story about your father, stepfather, brother, uncle, or whatever? Or they may get blamed for having led on the abuser, and so for that reason they all keep quiet.
No, and I can understand as a child, it doesn't make sense to you. So what do you begin by saying when you have to explain what just happened to you? But Lisa, where do we even begin to, to speak to our women, to also speak to our children about ways to go about, saying this is what's happening, to come out and actually seek help either from the police or everybody around them? How do you speak to them in a way that they're able to take ownership and be able to come out and seek help?
Well, I think the important thing, it's not only that we encourage women to speak out, but there is just as big a duty on those of us who are asking women to speak out to listen when they do. And I think too often when women do speak out, they get exposed to further victimization and blamed. So I think from an ethical point of view, we must make sure that we can offer good help. And then I think we can honestly and truly say to women, speak out. The other thing that we have to do is make sure that there are services available. Because in many parts of the country, who are you going to speak to? You might go to the police, but if they haven't been well trained, then you may you may regret ever having done that. So it's a very good thing for us to make sure there are also services to support, especially where you've had children, their families as well, so that they can assist them to go through the whole the challenge of reporting, because it's not necessarily an easy process. So I think we can say to those who have been raped to speak out when we can honestly say that we offer good help.
I mean, Lisa, the biggest campaigns in our country, I'm talking about 16 days of violence against women and children. Are these campaigns not effective enough so that they're able to speak to those who are victims and those that can offer support to the victims? Are they not being effective?
I don't think they can be. At best, they raise awareness. But I think if you're wanting to try to, I mean, if you look at our rape statistics, they tell us, they're so high that they tell us that in many parts of the country, people might not even think sexual violence is terribly wrong. They might just think it's a norm. So if you have 16 days once a year where you stand up and say, rape is wrong, that's not going to change a lifetime's worth of attitudes. So it's something that we need to keep going on an ongoing and sustained basis. We also need to look at how do we ensure that there's sufficient funding for those support organisations to be able to provide services? Because what often happens is that you have the 16 days, suddenly everybody comes forward looking for help, but there aren't enough people in place to cope with this new demand. So it's also, I think, about matching. When we tell women to speak out, matching to ensure that the services are ready to be able to deal with all the with additional survivors who come and speak.
And I mean, you could say maybe we need funding, there should be more campaigns out there, but I think also as communities we need to work around protecting our women and children. And this brings me to the point that, you know, even our men, we're not saying the men are always the culprits here. We're saying that how do we make a very society where everyone else is one and they're able to come together and guide one another. So this, what I wanted to say is, with the men in our community, are we empowering our men to be the protectors, to be those who are encouraging the women and the children, because they're not always the culprits?
I think there are a couple of things that communities could do. The one is we could be looking to see how safe is our physical environment. I mean, I think in many parts of the country, you know, women catch public transport, they walk home through long through veld with long grass, there's no lighting. It offers lots of opportunities for rape. So I think communities should challenge their local government to make sure that their living environment is safe, because that's one thing that could easily be done to help reduce the opportunities for rape. I think when it comes to looking at how do we challenge young men as well as older men, we could look at our schools and what's the kind of life skills and life orientation that's being offered. You know, I think one of the challenges one wants to issue to communities and to school governing bodies, for example, is that when a rape or sexual assault of some sort is reported, often the school will say to the young woman, but do you really want to ruin his career like that? Do you really want to get him into trouble? And I think we should, if we want to do young men a favour, we need to ensure they start taking responsibility for their actions. As long as we give excuses and say things like, don't ruin his career, oh, boys will be boys, oh, he didn't mean it, we are unfortunately encouraging bad behaviour. So I think it's very important that school governing bodies educate themselves around the causes of sexual violence, for example, so they can intervene appropriately at schools.
And Charlene, I'm going to go back and say, I feel like in most cases, you know, given that the situations that are happening out there, and if you look at Charlene's story as well, I feel like the men are always shut out. They've been told, well, this is a women's problem and it's children's problems as well. So how can men also be involved? I mean, because I did mention earlier on that we, you know, it's a common perception that they are always the couples that are, you know, committing this violent behaviors, but then I think the men also need to be part of the big group that is working together. How can they help?
Well, I think there are a couple of organisations that do deal with men and that have been looking at how do we shift and challenge men's behaviour, but I think it's also up to men to take the step to examine themselves. I mean, I think very often we sit and say things like, women mustn't dress like this, they mustn't do this, they mustn't go here. And actually the messages we should be starting to put out to young men as well as older men is, this is what rape is. You know, do you ask a woman first, or do you just assume that because she's dressed a certain way she wants to have sex with you? So I think we should perhaps start to encourage young men how to have good, safe sex that they check first is consensual. And I think we want to encourage young men to look at their behaviour and that they don't need to wait for anyone to ask them to do, that they can get together and do themselves.
And you know, it still looks like there's still the division. I mean, if we look at, there's a men rehabilitation organisation, and it's called the Sonke Gender Justice, and that's one of the things they do. They rehabilitate men, they work with men consistently, but then there shouldn't even be the division, Lisa, wouldn't you say?
You know, it really depends. I think one of the things we have to take into account is that rape, you can understand rape as an example of gender discrimination and gender inequality. And sometimes I think when women have been raped or they have experienced violence at the hands of men, they don't initially feel safe to engage immediately with men. So sometimes I think you do need to have safe women-only spaces before you can get to a point where women may feel just as comfortable as engaging with and safe to engage with men. I think the other difficulty is also that many men sadly just don't take women seriously. So when you put them into groups of women, they don't listen, they shout them down and they disagree. And what you end up doing, perhaps, is once again reinforcing for women that what they have to say is less important and has less value. So sometimes it's very useful to work together, both to get men to examine themselves and their behaviour, to behave in more egalitarian ways, and to help work with women to build their confidence, that when we do mix together, there isn't a silencing and a repeating of oppressive and unequal relationships.
And, you know, Charlene, I know in most cases, as, you know, I've worked with a couple of communities out there as a young person working with other young women, is they would say that they find themselves having to be interrogated. And pardon me for calling you Charlene. It's because I'm thinking of the incident that we had earlier on, because she actually had to create two characters, the Charlene that is happy and the Charlene that's also going through tremendous pain. And I can imagine, because you feel like you have absolutely nowhere to go. How do we then, with the law, work with the law, and maybe you can even advise us to what WISER does to see how they can actually include the law to deal with cases where women feel like they're actually being victimized. When you get there, you're told, no, it's your fault. I mean, what did you provoke the man? Because it's a waste of time if you want to go to the police station and want to report the case.
There are a couple of things. I think one of the things one can do is work with a community policing forum. Because if you look at law and policy, they all say that there are particular things that should be in place at police stations. And one of the things that communities can do is actually go and audit or monitor their police station to check that it has private facilities where you can give your statement, that there are crime kits available, that there are trained people to assist. So those would be some of the things that we could do. The other thing I think is to also challenge the police to start training those who work at their front desk in the client service centre. Because they train the detectives, but the detective is not the first person you see when you walk into a police station. So I think we should challenge the police to be telling us, what training are you doing? I mean, I monitor police stations on a regular basis, and I'm sorry to say that many officers, they don't know the law. They take and I've observed them taking statements in public in front of other people, and I've also observed them just last week, in fact, discouraging women from laying charges. So I think when that happens, we also need to be able to educate communities about what are your rights. That should never happen, and if that does happen, who can you complain to? And that's when it says go and approach an organisation who can assist you to take up your complaint, or you can also complain to your provincial Department of Community Safety if you feel you've been badly treated.
Wow, Lisa, that's really unbelievable. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us. And just quickly, what's the message out there that you want to give to women, quickly?
I think that you have rights, that if people ever try and deny them, seek assistance in order to challenge them, and to also remember that there is, I think it's what Charlene was saying, that there is always hope, that although this is a terrible experience, it can be overcome. And I think the message to other people as well is, if you are going to ask women to speak out, please listen, and listen in a way that is sympathetic and supportive.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And that is how we come to the end of our program today. Remember, you can catch the repeat tomorrow at 12:30 on Sunday, 12:30. And you can also find us on Twitter as well as on email. We are Bophelong at SABC. Thank you so much. Goodbye.